Hi YouTube, this is Evie. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we are going to be talking about something actually that was inspired based on a question that Brittany Simon received in her last TMI video. Actually, it's the one from October, and it got put out the first week of November, and I'm filming this in November, and you guys actually won't see it until December, so it'll actually be an older one, so I'll link to it down below in the description so you guys can watch it if you want to. But basically what happens during those videos is Brittany asks people for questions, and if you guys don't know who I'm talking about, Brittany Simon is another BDSM educator here on YouTube. We know each other in real life, we do a podcast together, all that great stuff, and I watch her content because I think she makes good videos. And she got this question from somebody for that video, which is basically, my partner doesn't provide aftercare during scenes. That makes me feel really bad. How do I fix that? Like, how do I handle that? Like, I always feel really badly after we do scenes. And before Brittany even got to answer that question, there were a lot of people who had already responded to it, basically saying that your partner should always provide aftercare, and if they don't, they're a bad person and they're dangerous and it's abuse and blah blah blah. Basically that it was bad and that it was inherently bad that they didn't get aftercare. And I thought that Brittany's response to that was really interesting and nuanced because it went beyond just you need aftercare and safe words and you should expect it. It was like, well, your partner's not a perfect person, right? They don't read minds, and if you don't ask for what you need and it includes things that are obvious like safe words or aftercare, they're not going to know that you need it. And so if you haven't asked for it, how can they provide you with something they don't know that you need? And I think there's a lot of different angles we can kind of go from here. I think the first one is that, you know, not everybody does aftercare, not everybody uses safe words, that's just a thing. And I know it's really easy to go, well, that's not SSC, but SSC is not the only way that people conduct their BDSM. There are alternatives to that, like rack and prick, and I would like to discuss those more, and so I'm going to be doing a whole separate video talking about the differences between SSC and rack and prick and other ways that people conduct their BDSM philosophy and how they do their kinks, because there are other alternatives out there that maybe have different standards, and it's important to also understand the context of how each of those terms were created and where they came from. So that's going to be a whole separate video. But it's also really important to talk about how a lot of times when you're getting into BDSM for the first time, you really get this sort of simplified view of how things should go, because there are a lot of things that are red flags, and I know I've talked about this in my own videos where I've discussed, you know, red flags to look out for if you're, you know, looking at a new partner or wanting to get started in the scene. A lot of times we talk about, you know, your partner should ask you about aftercare and safe words, and if they don't, that's a red flag. And it can be in a larger context of other things that can also be red flags. If your partner just forgets to bring them up during negotiation or doesn't directly ask you, they may just be forgetfulness, because not everybody is perfect at communicating. Or maybe they assume that we're playing as this dungeon, so of course we're going to be using the house safe word, which is safe word. Or maybe they always expect aftercare because that's what they've always done, and it would be weird if they didn't do it, so we'll just deal with that when aftercare is actually needed in the moment. And on the other side of that is when it is actually a red flag, a lot of times it's accompanied by language like, you know, real doms, you know, don't provide aftercare, real doms don't need aftercare, real submissives don't need safe words, or you're a fake, or you're not really a slave if you need safe words or whatever, like all that kind of like problematic language and truisms around like this is what real BDSM is, because everybody has a different way of doing BDSM, and that also applies to how people do aftercare and how people handle safe words. So not asking for them or not providing it because somebody doesn't know that it's a need that you have is not inherently something that makes them an unsafe person, because not everybody is perfect at communication and not everybody plays the exact same way. And particularly if you are an S-type who is needing aftercare, needs a certain setup of safe words during the scene, and you don't ask for that, like, we put too much pressure on dominants, I feel like sometimes. So you expect like dominants are the architects of the scene, dominants are the ones who are supposed to come up with the ideas, and somehow we also expect dominants to lead during negotiation, which is not really how it should be done. during negotiation, you haven't had any power exchange happen yet. You're on the same playing field, more or less, because negotiations are about two parties coming together and making sure that both of their needs are communicated in that moment. And so if you have a partner who doesn't directly ask you, what do you need for aftercare after this type of scene? What safe words would you like to use? How will we, use safe words in, physically, if there's going to be something like a gag that would impede your speech, etc. Asking for those things is important. And if they don't ask, that it's usually not a malicious thing. It's usually just they have made assumptions about how they do their play. And of course, this kind of, of course we would do aftercare. Of course we're going to use the safe words like I mentioned. But if somebody doesn't ask, the biggest and most important thing you can learn when you're new in BDSM is how to be your own self-advocate. And that includes, even if you're the submissive in a scene, during negotiation, to ask if somebody doesn't ask, what are we going to be using for safe words? What kind of aftercare can you provide? What level of contact are we going to have after the scene? Are we going to exchange phone numbers? Like, all of that stuff. You need to learn to ask for that, because not everybody does. And that's a way of keeping yourself safe. It's a way of evaluating if this is something that you want. If this is somebody that you want to play with, if you're compatible on that level, all of that stuff, you need to learn how to ask for that, because people are not mind readers. And this is actually irrespective of what side of the slash that person falls on or what side of the slash you fall on. If you're a dominant and you need aftercare as the dom, you need to ask for that. You need to talk about it. If you are a dom, you should definitely make sure that your partner understands what safe words you're going to be using, all that stuff. But as a submissive, you can totally take charge for negotiation and make sure those things are communicated. And if after a scene you haven't gotten those things you needed, or safe words were unclear or whatever, you need to ask about that. You need to be able to go back to your partner and say, hey, that scene was really great, but I felt bad after the scene. I had a bad drop because we weren't able to do this kind of aftercare, and I realized that maybe we didn't get to talk about it. Would we be able to do this in the future? Or here's how you can help me now, or here's what I need from you in this moment, and have that conversation. But there are people who just don't use safe words, who just don't do aftercare. And that's not a bad thing. Like, you just need to be able to communicate your expectations around what's going to be used. And if there are people who say, we don't play with safe words, we don't play with aftercare, that's fine. That doesn't make them bad people. I know plenty of people who don't use aftercare, who don't use safe words, and they're not bad people. They're not evil. They're not wrong. They're not abusers. That's just how they play. And they've communicated and negotiated that with their partners. Because really, BDSM is not about, the trappings around it. It's not about, you have to mark all of these boxes in order to do BDSM correctly. There's no box that says we have to do aftercare, and we have to do safe words, or we have to do whatever, and that is how you make it a good scene. What makes a good scene is when everybody consents to what's going on, including the absence of safe words, including a lack of aftercare. This is how we negotiate for anything. You can communicate with your partner and be like, I want to be able to do this consensual non-consent scene, and so I don't want to have any safe words. And while generally speaking, when I'm talking about BDSM, and most BDSM educators will do this, is we do best practices. We try to demonstrate and communicate to people, this is what is the safest way to do this, and that usually includes a conversation around, you need to make sure you do X and Y thing, right? But there are still people who don't do that. We just don't want to encourage people who don't have any experience in the scene to play with those elements, because you just don't have any experience yet, and so you don't know how you're going to react physically, mentally, emotionally to certain kinds of scenes or different kinds of scene energy. And so that's why we encourage people to do aftercare and safe words. But even if you've been in the scene for a couple months, it doesn't make you a bad person or an evil person if you decide with your partner, we don't want to use safe words, we don't need aftercare for this kind of scene. Whatever, you get to make that decision. The important part is that it's all consensual, and everybody who is involved understands that's what the expectation is. Also very important is, if you have negotiated to not do any aftercare, if you do end up needing aftercare, communicate that with your partner. They may be able to help you out. At the same time, there are a lot of dominants who don't provide aftercare because the kind of headspace that they enter during a scene takes them a long time to get out of, and they're not going to be in that warm and cuddly protective mood that a lot of people need for aftercare. They're going to be hyped up, they're going to be aggressive, they're going to need distance and space to kind of come back down from their own top space that they're dealing with, that they're going to need to resolve on their own before they're able to do anything for you. So just keep that in mind. I think there's more nuance and more, you know, subtlety out there in the BDSM world, and I think sometimes gets presented online. And I think it's important to make sure that you communicate with your partner what those expectations are, because there's a reason why people have, you know, on their hard limits list, they state, you know, hard limit, you know, no scat, no cuts, no drawing blood, no permanent marks, no disfigurement, dismemberment, whatever. And most people who are new to the scene, it's like, well, duh, you wouldn't play with stuff like that. Who does stuff like that? I know people who do pretty much all of those things, and I know people who don't have those as hard limits. So that's why it's important, you know, nothing in BDSM is obvious. Nothing is assumed. Nothing should be assumed, because this is an alternative lifestyle. This is where people come to express and find people with whom they can share their alternative interest, and not everybody has the same way of doing that. So basically, quick summary here before I end the video is, don't assume that people use safe words or do aftercare. It doesn't make them a bad person if they don't. What's important is that you learn how to communicate with that everybody, you know, whatever decision is made around aftercare or safe words, that it's done in a consensual, informed manner. As long as it's informed and consensual, that's the only thing that matters. And I'm going to do, I think, plenty of other videos that are inspired by this topic. There's a lot that's been kind of stewing in my head around, you know, your kink is not my kink, and kind of more nuanced, sort of more advanced BDSM practices aside of sort of what I've talked about before in this channel. So if you guys want to see more of that, please do subscribe, because I do make videos twice a week. If you have any comments or questions about this subject, do put it down in the comment section below. If you want to support this channel, which is how I'm able to do things like have nice lighting and a good camera and nice sound and weekly live streams and all of that great stuff, highly recommend you check out my Patreon. Link will be down in the description box and on the end screen here in a moment. But until I see you guys next time, hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.